Hello, everybody. Welcome to Mindful Metal Jacket. I am glad you're here or there. I'm glad you're here on Earth, alive, breathing, and listening to this podcast or watching it. If you're watching it on YouTube, you don't see me right now because I don't really film these intros, which is good for you because I am naked with my ankles spread further apart than they've ever been. So, well, there was that one night in high school, but I'm just being a silly goose. How are you doing, everybody? Thanks for tuning in. I appreciate it. This is what do you call it? A passion project. So, I do it for you and for me because it's fun and it's healthy for me, I think. But a lot of folks listen and a lot of folks don't. Most people do not, but the folks that do have been so kind in reaching out. And thank you to everyone that's reached out and shared their experience with the show. It means a lot to me. Some people have done it through reviews. If you'd like to do that, that would be great. Give a nice review on iTunes. Those have been very touching, and a lot of people have emailed and Instagrammed and all of those things. So I am incredibly grateful. And it is not a show that is blowing up or making money. So I appreciate hearing from the people that enjoy it because it makes me feel good, and it makes me want to keep doing it. Also, I enjoy the conversations very much. So the intros, not as much because I just feel like a babbling psychopath in my pajamas. I lied when I said I was naked, but I lied when I said pajamas too. I'm wearing sweatpants. Anyways, thank you for listening. Fun episode today. Good episode. It's me and my friend Carmen Lagala, who is a comedian here in New York City. She is a wonderful comic, very funny person. You might have seen her on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert. And I believe she does not have a podcast, which we talk about. One of the very few comedians to not have a podcast. But she's a great comic and a really kind person. And I don't know her too well, so we got to know each other a little bit. We have very good mutual friends, Steve Rogers and Ronan Hirschberg. And so I see her around town, and our mutual friends had mentioned that she's somebody that has similar anxiety as me. So we talk about that. We talk about panic attacks, anxiety. We're both track and field runners, which we discovered. And I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a really fun and enjoyable conversation. So I hope you enjoy it as well and hope you get something out of it. And I hope you're doing well. I hope you're healthy. This virus seems to be raging, as they say. I'm avoiding most news and was trying to avoid social media, as you know, How to Break Up with Your Phone by Catherine Price. Great book. I keep recommending. Although I've relapsed a little bit on the phone because my wife is out of town, and that makes it a little trickier because I'm here alone. And I've been posting some stuff. I have a new little mini podcast with Ronan Hirschberg, who was the first episode of this podcast, and it's on YouTube. It's called Joe and Ronan Talk Movies, and it's us discussing movies. The latest episode is up on my YouTube. There's 2 episodes. They're up on my YouTube. The first one, we discuss the year 1994, and we digress a lot. And on the second one, we discuss Boston movies, and we really trash Good Will Hunting and talk about the therapy aspects of Good Will Hunting and how they're a little bit silly. But it's fun. It's also on the Tuesdays with Stories Patreon page. If you're a Tuesday, which many of you are, I know, you can get on the Tuesdays with Stories Patreon, and you can hear the episodes there, along with a ton of bonus stuff with Mark and I, of course. So I highly recommend and encourage you to go subscribe to my YouTube, Joe List on YouTube, trying to build that up. And I got a web series on there called Connor's Ultimate Movies, as well as Joe and Ronan Talk Movies, and a bunch of old sketches, The Ultimate Warrior. Those are all on there. I don't know if you've watched those, but they're really fun and silly and involve anxiety, of course. And there's no stand-up for a while. So this is it. This is how I live my life now, talking into a microphone, not in front of an audience, but in front of a computer screen. How are you guys doing? What's everyone up to? Are you guys all right? Are your jobs still happening? I hope. Hopefully we get a stimulus package soon. I hope everyone's doing okay. I imagine there's a great deal of frustration and sadness and despair, maybe depression. I don't know. I mean, I imagine these things are spiking. I realize how fortunate I am to have podcasts that do okay and allow me to sort of create in this time where there's not very many shows at all. And I'm also grateful to have a wife that I like. The last 4 days I've been here by myself during this pandemic where you can't really do much. And it's really made me see and experience what it must be like to not have a wife or husband or boyfriend or girlfriend or roommates. It's quite lonely. Of course, in my old life, I was by myself all the time on the road, but at least I'd be going and doing shows and seeing people. So I wish you the best, and I'm hoping the best for you. And reach out if you're struggling. Maybe I could help. Or maybe it might just feel good to tell somebody. I don't know. Hopefully this podcast helps for the hour and change that it lasts. And if you want another break, go check out Joe and Ron on Talking Movies. A lot of jokes on there. And of course, Tuesdays with stories. I assume if you're here, you're there. But maybe that's a bad assumption. Maybe you hate that show and you like this show. But I don't imagine that to be the case for most of you. Anywho, thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for supporting me in this time. I hope I can be supportive to you through the podcast. Now here I am just yammering on again. But I wish you a safe holiday. And if you're going to travel and see family, which I understand, try to do it as safe as possible. That's what I say. As safely as possible, whatever the right term is. I'm reading this book. I read the book Into the Wild by John Krakauer, which is probably my favorite book. The movie is okay. Actually, we talk about it, Ronan and I. But I like the movie enough. I love the book by John Krakauer, Into the Wild. I love all John Krakauer's books. I highly recommend Missoula if you'd like to be enlightened on campus rape. It's a tough read, but a great book. And Into Thin Air is great. He's got a lot of great books. Under the Banner of Heaven. Anyways, I read Into the Wild a long time ago, and then I just found out about this book by Christopher McCandless's sister called The Wild Truth, and it's like a companion piece to that. And why do I bring it up? Well, I bring it up because I'm going to read a quote from there, but also I thought you might be interested in what I'm reading. A lot of people want to have a book list of the books I've mentioned on here. There's a lot. Anything by Thich Nhat Hanh I recommend. Right now, by my bed, I always have a Thich Nhat Hanh book with me. Any of them will do. The first ones I read are Happiness and Peace of Mind. Right now I have The Art of Living next to my bed. Running on Empty by Jonas Webb is the big book I mentioned about childhood emotional neglect. Sharon Salzberg, who I had on, her newest book is called Real Change. And then Bill Irvine, who I had on last week, who was fantastic. He talked about Stoicism. He has a book called The Stoic Challenge, which I don't have. I got to get that book. And the book I talk about a lot, and the book that got me into him, is called A Guide to the Good Life by William Irvine. Highly recommend that book. And there's also a book, one of my favorite books ever is Oliver Berkman wrote a book called The Antidote. And that book touches on a lot of these things. And The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle is another one that really rocked my tits. And The Wise Heart by Jack Kornfield. Those are all books that would put you in the right direction to feel better. Anyways, The Wild Truth by Carine, I don't know how to say her name, honestly. Carine. Carine McCandless. I'm reading it. Powerful book. But there's a quote here. Here comes the quote. Everyone loves the quote. This is from an excerpt, I guess, from Kristen Jongen's book, Growing Wings. Here it is. Perhaps strength doesn't reside in having never been broken, but in the courage required to grow strong in the broken places. We're all a little broken right now, perhaps, but it's all about finding that strength. We'll be better. We'll be back. Vaccine coming. Enjoy my conversation with my friend, comedian Carmen Lagala. It's best if we just jump in there. Here we go. We're recording. This is it. Good to see you.
You too.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I've been hearing everyone gives me anxiety resumes now because I have what do you call it? Like a mental health podcast. So I get people being like, you should have on.
Who's super anxious.
Yeah, so you got some problems. According to your friends, you're all fucked up. Is that true?
No, who the hell would say such a thing? No, I know exactly who probably recommended. Well, besides Stephen.
It's Steve Rogers, yeah.
Yeah. I talk about anxiety with Renan a lot. Have you had him on?
Yeah, we had Renan's the first episode. He was the number one guest.
Perfect. Yeah, he's my go-to.
He's great, and we just did another movie sort of podcast where we talk movies because he got some controversial movie takes, as do I. But yeah, Rana was the first episode, and he had a great line because he said, "Wow, going with a nobody right out of the gate," which is a good point, and that's why I'm bad at business. But yeah, so you're friends with those guys, and those are two of my good buddies, and so we're friends of friends, and we've met a couple times, but we don't really know each other very well.
That's true.
Would you say that?
Yeah, I would say that.
It's always hurtful when you're like, we're not that close, and the other person's like, what?
Yeah. Like, I thought we were best friends.
So what is your we'll get into all the things, but what's your poison? Is it more anxiety, depression, panic, all of the above? What do you got going?
Oh, a nice little cocktail of all of them, I would say. I've been better lately, though. Quarantine really slowed it right down. It's quite the opposite of what I thought would happen. I used to have panic attacks on stage and they stopped. I had only one during quarantine.
That's still a lot, though, to have a panic attack on stage. I mean, this has only been a few months of shows, right? I mean, like
eight or 9 months. This looked like March.
Yeah, but I mean, I didn't start doing shows till like late May, so I was lopping off the first.
Oh, that's true.
Months.
Neither did I. That's true.
May,
June, July. It's good for me. I used to keep like a thing, and it would be like, 2 this week.
Wow.
Like a schedule. I kept like a little dais. It's somewhere in my phone.
All right. So I'm not an interviewer by trade, so I got to figure out where to start here because I just want to jump into panic attacks on stage. So you're a comedian. I will have given an intro before this. How long have you been doing stand-up is question one. And question two is when in your career was your first on stage panic situation?
Oh, yeah. I think I've been at it about 10 years. The first 5 being in Vermont, very different from New York City, a lot less opportunity. But panic attacks probably didn't start until a few years ago. And I wouldn't have known what they were. I didn't even know when I had my first panic attack that that's what it was. I was like, that was just a bad 10 minutes or whatever it was. But now I'm like, oh, that's what people are talking about. So on stage, yeah, maybe 3 years, which is weird that it would be a later thing. Maybe it's 4 or 5. And then like what was happening when I was just on stage panicking, but not having a panic attack all the other times, because that's so many open mics of just silence, just cold, hard silence in a basement at the Creek.
Right. So first of all, I just found out, Sarah just told me, are you from Vermont?
Yes.
I did not know that. We're fellow New Englanders. With a name like Carmen Lagala, you don't think Vermont.
She flew from Italy? What is she doing? I'm not Italian at all either, I don't think. Maybe like 2%. Yeah, where are you from? New Hampshire?
I'm from Massachusetts.
Oh, I see that.
I grew up like 35, 40 minutes south of Boston.
Okay.
but it's so you hear so few people coming from Vermont. I mean, you got
Yeah.
Bernie Sanders and I can't even think of a second person from Vermont.
No, that's it. Ben, Jerry. I don't even know if they're from Vermont though. They're probably from New York. Same
Oh
with
yeah,
Bernie's technically New
yeah,
York.
yeah. He's a Brooklyn bro. So,
Hmm.
and you started in like Burlington, I assume,
Yes.
and
Yeah,
was there? Oh, go ahead.
there was nothing. There was a class, somebody was teaching a class, and the class turned out to be more of a structured open mic situation. Um, so you'd come in and like workshop with 10 people, but you had to get up every single time. So it's basically like forced open mics
Right.
in a
Now
small setting.
there's a
Now
great
that, yes.
club there now, which
Oh, it's great now.
I hope they're doing okay throughout the this thing, the Vermont Comedy
Right?
Club in Burlington, which is
Yes.
amazing.
They haven't shut down. I haven't heard anything. It seems okay, thank God. Yes. Yeah, now it's great. When I started, it was a lot. I ended up running 3 things a week just to keep getting on stage, and I would go to music open mics and
Yeah,
people would be playing guitar and I'd be like, "Can I get up and tell jokes?" And they're like, "Ew." And then they let me because it's Vermont.
sure.
And yeah.
Wow. So okay, so you don't have panic attacks early on in your career doing sets around Vermont, but are you anxious when you first start? Like, are you freaking out, but not to the level of panic, or were you just kind of fine then?
I would get really anxious before I went on stage. And I did a thing where I would kind of self-sabotage and make sure that I was in a situation where it was always kind of dire. I think subconsciously I thought that would make me better and funnier if I had less time to prepare, maybe. Like I was managing a place that kind of operated as a comedy club. We did comedy 5 days a week, advertised as a comedy club. And I would work behind the counter and then get up on stage in the middle of making people drinks and then get back behind the counter. So it was just very frantic all the time. Everybody needed something all the time. The comics would be like, "When am I? What is this?" Uh, so I kind of, maybe I'm just trying to repeat that over and over again. But I don't like a lot of time to prepare. I like to give myself 10 minutes, 5 minutes before I go on stage and then start frantically line by line writing out
Yeah,
what I'm going to do.
but that seems like I can understand why that would be helpful because, like, for me, the times I have had, and I want to get more into the details of you having anxiety attacks on stage, but like for the times when I've had like real bad anxiety on stage, I'll go into crowd work because it kind of puts me into the moment.
Oh, wow.
Whereas, like, if I'm doing material, it's like I can freak out in my head while doing material that I've already have written that I already know because it's like second nature or whatever. So my
Uh-huh.
brain is going haywire. But so I understand the thing of like not preparing or being distracted. Like if you're waiting tables or bartending or seating people, whatever it is you're doing, you're kind of distracted by that. So it doesn't allow you to
Hmm.
get into your head. So I understand like
Hmm.
the more frantic, the less anxiety, which sounds
Hmm.
strange.
Yeah. I hadn't thought of that. I thought I was trying to create more anxiety, but maybe this whole time I was trying to save myself from anxiety.
It's possible. I'm not a doctor. I mean,
No, you are.
there's a,
In this situation, you are absolutely. I wrote down your do crowd work thing. I'm like, oh, I hadn't even thought of that.
it really is helpful because I mean, like I've had anxiety attacks that were like horrendous while on stage, but nobody really seemed to notice. But if
Right.
you start asking questions, that's like there's an old trick if you're having real bad anxiety or someone's having panic is to ask them what color their shoes are or ask yourself that because I don't know, have you ever heard that someone say what color are your shoes?
No.
Because it kind of takes them to you have to look down and be at least present for at least a split second to go to look down, see your feet and acknowledge a color and then answer. So it
Yeah.
at least takes you out of this thing of like we're all going to die or
Yeah.
whatever it is the person's panicking about. So kind of for me doing crowd work and going, hey, what did you say, what's this? Yeah, I have to at least listen, so at least I'm listening to what somebody's saying instead of just
Hmm.
completely freaking out.
Wow. I'm going to try that next time, even though crowd work is another separate thing that gives me severe anxiety. I want to do it so bad, but it is so scary for me.
Yeah, it's weird because it does feel counterintuitive because anxiety inducing also. And also for me, like any kind of like confrontation is like such
Yes.
an insane trigger. So the idea of
Mhm.
like, I don't know about you, but like in comedy, I have the most anxiety I get now with comedy, which is I don't have too much as far as performing. But if I'm waiting to go on and somebody's like heckling or talking or having an interaction, that gives me anxiety because I start to feel rage, and then I'm like, am I going to have to
Yes.
like fight
Yeah.
somebody or deal with somebody? I don't know if you have that at all.
Oh, for sure. I've come on stage and just been mad immediately, and the whole audience is like, oh, they don't like I don't know. They definitely don't like mad women, I don't think either. Like, especially when you just come out and you're just pissed off immediately. I'm just like a very Bill Burr tone, which I don't usually have. They don't really appreciate that because they're like, where's this coming from? And I'm like, you. You
Yeah,
know?
well, there's that trick of like, you don't want the audience to see you as like a real, actual, like, fallible person. You'd like to see some amount of performance. When people are like,
Mhm.
shut up, you fucking bitch. People are like, what? What's up with this guy? Like, if someone's like, turn the air conditioner off, they're like, oh, this guy's a maniac.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't think I've turned on the audience in years, but that used to, I'm glad I don't have that instinct anymore. If somebody is talking in the audience, I do get mad on the behalf of whoever is on stage. But if I'm on stage and somebody's doing that, I tend to kind of very gently, if I have to, I usually don't address it at all, and then it goes away. I don't know. People don't like to heckle me or attack me. And if they do say something, I don't take it as them trying to be mean, I guess. I don't know. It's usually like very benign heckles. If I'm getting a heckle, it's something that's not adding to it, but it's just kind of like they think they're, I don't know. I think it's coming from not a bad place.
Yeah, and I do think I agree, and I have a similar experience. But like, I do feel like straight up heckling is actually like pretty rare.
Right.
Like, it's not often you're watching a show and someone's like, "Yeah, because you suck there." Whatever, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, that doesn't happen very often. Usually, it's more, for me at least, like it's more someone that's like either they're having a conversation with each other, like a table's talking to
Oh
each
yeah.
other, or there's that thing that's like, "Oh yeah, yeah, so
Yeah.
true. That's funny." And I always say those are hard to deal with because they don't think they're being a problem. So it's hard to be like,
Yes.
"Hey, what are you doing, you asshole?" Because they're like, "What? I'm
Yeah.
enjoying you."
Exactly.
I also always find those, for the most part, and this is not obviously in stone, but for the most part, when men are interrupting a show, it's because they're being asshole. They're actively being an asshole. They're like
Hmm.
heckling, like classic heckling.
Hmm.
And for the most part, when women are interrupting the show, it's because of that thing. They're having
Hmm.
fun, or they're talking to somebody, or
Hmm.
they're saying like, "Oh yeah," or "No, no." It's like that kind of thing,
Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
harder to deal with because when someone's being an asshole, you can just be like, "Hey, shut the fuck up," whatever it is, whatever your
Yeah.
line is. But
Right.
when you
Everyone's
yell
on
at somebody
side.
that's like, "I'm having fun," what are you talking
Yeah.
about? When someone
Yeah.
doesn't know they're interrupting, it becomes difficult to deal with.
For sure.
Um,
Too many wines or whatever it is.
yeah, exactly. But anyways, I went off on a tangent there. I apologize. Um, so what was your first anxiety attack on stage like? Was that still in Vermont? What was that situation and feeling?
I'm sure it was probably on the road. I go out with Hari Kondabolu. I'm pretty sure it would have been with him. And a lot of it, like early on, I was very anxious about open, and nobody had ever asked me to open for them before. Um, so I was very nervous to get it wrong, because then if you just don't get invited back, you're like, okay, I did something and I'll never succeed at this kind of a thing. So I was just very careful. Maybe just being exposed to different audiences for the first time made me anxious, but now those shows make me less anxious. The more people, the less anxious I am because it stops being real, I think. The less people, I'm like, less chances to get this uh, right
Right.
for these particular people. So I really don't remember the first one. I just remember that I started documenting it at some point because I was like, what is this? This is interesting. Something's happening when I'm on stage that I hate. And then
And
when I became aware of it, I think that made it worse. which is
Y-
fine.
yeah. Well, that's how like agoraphobia and shit kind of manifest or comes about, is because once you have it, then you start thinking about, then it's on your mind. It's like this weird,
Which one's agoraphobia?
that's I think it's fear of leaving the house. Now I'm nervous now that you asked me.
Oh, no, you're
Like,
right.
yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
yes.
that's like you're afraid to go out or do anything or to leave, because
Yeah,
once you experience it, then you're like, oh, what if this happens at this show? What if this happens at that
yeah,
show? That would be
yeah.
really
Yes.
horrible. So
Right.
yeah, just like having one makes it, opens you to having a lot more.
For sure. And it did. Yeah, it made it much worse. I didn't think about that until now. That's like had you ever had what's the sleep thing where as you're falling asleep, sleep paralysis? Have you ever had that? Where
N-
demons are sitting on your chest and stuff?
no, but I've heard about
Okay.
it. Paul Odo is a friend of mine. He's a comic, and he was
Yes.
on
Oh
the
yeah,
show and
you
he
have
was
that.
talking about it. Yeah. Do you
Yeah,
deal with that?
I do, but again, I'm not supposed to talk about it because that is one of the things that will trigger it. So I'm gonna not.
Oh,
But it is,
Jesus.
yeah, that's clinically, like it actually says that in something online where they're like, hey, don't think about it because it'll come back as soon as you talk and think about it. And I was like, oh, what a horrifying twist on something that's already so bad. I had it for a period of time where I would have it like every night for a few months. It was such a bad period of my life. I didn't sleep. um yeah, you just kind of like see things, and you are paralyzed and you can't do anything about it, but you're fully conscious. Your brain's awake, but your body is in the paralysis stage where it puts you under so that you can sleep and not get up and walk around and walk off cliffs and whatnot. So it's this in between stage, but then it's also lucid, and your brain starts to conjure up whatever is most horrifying to you personally. So it creates this nice thing for just you. And I ended up conquering it, but I am afraid to talk about it just because I'm afraid it'll come back.
God, I mean, first of all, that is like the most insane, and I don't want to talk about it too much, but I'm like, is that an anxiety disorder or is that like a physical
I don't
disorder?
know. They don't know much about it. Seems like there's not a lot on it, but it does make sense that people believed in demons, and well, they still do. Just ghosts, anything like that. I've had the first time I had it, I thought it was a ghost experience for a couple of years until I learned what sleep paralysis was. I was like, oh, it totally makes sense that people think of those things. If they have this once, then you're like, oh, ghost, obviously.
Right. God. Well, I know the feeling of like not talking about it. I have that with, I've had insomnia a couple times. I didn't see demons, but it was just anxiety. I was having basically panic attacks and couldn't sleep for like, it was like a week. It's happened to me twice.
Oof.
And I mean, I would fall asleep here and there. I'd sleep for 45 minutes, whatever, but I would go to bed, and it was kind of like the yips, which is like a sports term. I don't know if you're a big sports fan, but that will happen where like people can't throw the ball to first base or throw the ball home all of a sudden.
Oh
And like
wow.
it's just like an anxiety disorder, basically.
Yeah.
And I had that with sleeping because like I just was having such anxiety that I felt like I'm like, oh, I'm not gonna be able to fall asleep. I don't know how. It feels like you don't know how to do it. It's just
Yeah.
like the
Yeah.
yips. I'm like, I can't even fathom how I've ever fallen asleep. It doesn't make sense. My
Yes.
eyes are
Yeah.
just closed. I'm not gonna go into the sleep. And I have it just having that experience, and it was years ago. I still now I'm like, no one. If I hear someone talk about insomnia and
Yeah.
not being able to sleep, I'm like, no, 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 shut up, don't say that,
Yeah.
because if I hear it, and I'm
Yes.
trying to like expose myself to it more. But if I heard it on a movie, I would have so much trouble sleeping that night.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I have it still now. Like the other last week or 2 weeks ago, I think it was 2 weeks ago, I was getting ready to go home for Thanksgiving, and I had it. I just couldn't fall back asleep. Eventually, I did. It took me like 3 hours. But that
Mhm.
feeling of
Mhm.
just staring at the ceiling and watching the time tick away is
Ugh.
horrendous.
Yeah. Like mind prison.
It's
Yeah,
just
because sleep is such a mind fuck. Because like, what is it? What are we doing? Yeah, and yeah.
it doesn't make sense. Like it just doesn't
No.
make sense that you're like, so I'll sit here and close my eyes and then like drift away. It
Yeah.
doesn't. It's really bizarre, and I hope I'm not triggering anybody to deal with their insomnia. But I will say this: the thing that helped me, my therapist helped me so much with it, and I don't know if this helps with the demon shit, you demons sitting on your chest. But what helped me with falling asleep was the idea of, my therapist was like, you will fall asleep eventually. Like, and he's kind of, I was like having anxiety about the middle of the afternoon. He's like, well, first of all, you shouldn't be worrying about it right now. It's 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So don't worry about it now. And then he was like, when's the last time you were put in an asylum because you couldn't sleep for months? Like,
Mm-hmm.
eventually you'll be fine. You'll just be a little tired the next day. And
Mm-hmm.
so for me, and I don't know if, and I want to get into what kind of things you do to deal with your anxiety, but accepting my worst fear was something that my therapist has told me for a long time, of like, which really does help. The idea of, like, in that situation, for instance, not being able to sleep is like, okay, worst case scenario, tomorrow I'm really sleepy.
Yeah.
And that
Yeah.
allows me I kind of fall asleep. It's kind of counterintuitive, but I don't know if that helps at all. The accepting the fact that maybe there'll be a demon sitting on your face tonight.
Yeah, I did. Yeah. I think at some point I did accept it. The way I conquered it was I can't remember if I read something or if I just decided to do like a very cartoony, like I'm just going to face it head on, but I kind of somehow made like a mental game of it where it was like, okay, it's welcome to come tonight, but if it comes tonight, I'm going to fight back. And now I can't remember the details of what I did. Maybe a sword fight. I don't really remember, but definitely, oh, I made it funny. So like it started to get really scary and it was like everything awful. And then I just started laughing at it because I was like, that is the stupidest, what, my mom with no face and being, I don't want to say any of the stuff. It's like pretty awful. But yeah, you're just, it'll be like demon rape or something. And I'm like, this is so absurd. It's insane that this is happening in my brain. It just becomes funny because it's so bad. The way that
Yeah.
like, yeah,
Oh, no, keep
awful
going.
things are, yeah. Oh, I think like Drew Michael talking about like 9/11 and how it's so absurd that a plane would fly into a building that it kind of becomes funny. And so I'm misquoting him and I'm going to ruin his life, but I totally get what he's, it's like, it's so absurd.
I mean, I don't know the bit, but it made me laugh. But yeah, I mean, that really does help, is to sort of laugh at it. And I work on with anxiety and panic, is sort of personifying it, which sounds silly. I mean, all these
Mhm.
exercises sound so silly, but the kind of the
Mhm.
idea of like, of greeting your anxiety, of going like, oh, hello. And some
Mhm.
people give it a name, hey,
Oh
Steve,
yeah.
or whatever. And like, there's old crazy Barry coming to give me anxiety. But it does actually help. And I talk about it a lot on the podcast, but like my therapist, I kind of use this um, mantra that he gave me, where I'll talk about the anxiety I'm having, and then he'll always say, of course, like, of course you have anxiety. And that actually helps, because I'm like, of course I'm having anxiety
Mhm.
before a TV set, or going to
Mhm.
see family, or some kind of whatever. It's like, of course you're having anxiety. And it's to kind of lessen it, to just be like, oh, that's this thing I have. That's the anxiety that I've been having for years, and I keep overcoming it.
Mhm. Hmm.
Um, no, where are you with therapy? Are you do you go to therapy? Are you willing to admit if you go to therapy?
I don't go to therapy. I should. I would really like to. It There's a mental block with trying to find a therapist for me. I feel like if I was able to get through all of whatever's happening to finally find a therapist, then I'd be cured. I'd be like, oh, I just did the thing that I can't do. It's over, which is stupid, but it's just what my thought. I don't know. I look up names. I'll get like pretty far and then I'll just be like, nope, not today.
Interesting.
Hmm.
Have you been to therapy at any point?
Oh, I went to a sports therapist in college probably 4 times.
What's
I
a
did
sports
a
therapist?
I did a track and field when I was there, and at some point I couldn't get any faster, and it was very upsetting. So they kind of, I think it's like a regular therapist, but you just talk about sports related stuff or whatever you want to, I assume. But yeah, I would just go in and be like, I'm not getting any faster. I don't understand why. I feel like a failure. Um, can't remember what else. I remember crying at therapy, but I
Hell
I
yeah.
think I was just, yeah, I don't remember why. I think she was just, she was confused. She's like, okay. We just kind of talked about track because she also ran track.
Oh, I ran track also and
Yeah.
cross country. I love it. I loved all of it. It was all,
Yes.
I loved everything about it. And I also think it's funny. Was this in college or high school?
Both, but college was when they actually provided a sports therapist.
Gotcha. That makes more sense.
Mhm.
That could be a whole other side conversation just about track in general. But I always think running, like I was a distance runner. I ran the mile and 2 mile and cross country
I
and
can see that. I bet you were good at it.
oh, thanks. Yeah. I mean, I loved it, an 800 meter and all that stuff. But I loved it. But I also think that I'm like, I had like almost no anxiety in high school. Like I just
Yeah.
was fine. And I think a lot of it was that, I mean, first of all, obviously, like maybe life is a little simpler back then or whatever. But
Right.
I also just ran 7, 8 miles a day. And
Yeah.
and there's also the fact of like, I was socializing with a bunch of people all day. Like as soon as school
Right.
was over, I was with 30 people for
Yes.
hours, which is
On a
obviously,
team. Yeah.
yeah,
Working towards
exactly.
goals. Yeah.
Exactly. Common goal and just fun. I mean, like it was so
Yeah.
much fun. And
Yeah.
also just being in tip top shape. Tip
Yep.
top tape is a product, or it should be at least. That should be a
Tip top tape.
tip top tape, and it's like a Scotch tape. But anyways, um, but yeah, I think running helped so much. But yeah, a sports psychologist is just a psychologist, I guess, because if you're
Yeah.
worried about running, I mean, they can be like, well, what are you really worried about? And maybe it's
Right.
about acceptance or whatever, or meeting your um, expectations or whatever it is.
Yeah.
That counts, I say.
That's true. Okay.
Yeah, you've been to therapy.
Okay. Nice. I
um,
always forget about it.
but I say go back. I mean, I love
Hmm.
my therapist. I talked to him yesterday,
Hmm.
and I leave and I feel so goddamn good afterwards.
How did you find one though? I'm afraid I will find one and then I'll be too, I'll feel bad about leaving that therapist if it's not working. It needs to be a pretty good match. I don't want to see somebody that helps me but doesn't, I don't feel like I would hang out with outside of therapy, maybe.
Yeah, I get it, and it's funny because I'm like, I have the same fear, even though I have a therapist that I loved. I go to Alan, who's like the comedy therapist that I'm sure you've
Mm.
heard about. He sees like I don't even know how many comics it is, but it's a ton
Yeah.
of comics for years. He was Richard Lewis's therapist, like in like 1979.
Oh my God. Is that where he
Um,
started? That's how we got to start.
I think it might be.
Comedy therapy.
I think it literally is, and um, like his resume of comics is insane. But
Yeah.
yeah, so he's like unbelievable. And what's great about him is like obviously like a ton of people I know him, love him, and
Hmm.
because he's a comedy therapist, you don't have to explain anything comedy
Yep.
wise. Like he's like
Yeah.
he knows who, you know, Esty is or the New York
Hmm.
Comedy Club. He's familiar with like doing late nights, all that stuff.
Yeah.
But I understand your feeling because I've thought like if he retires or dies, he's 105 years old. This guy, like if something happens, I'm like, what would I do? I mean, like obviously at this point, I've been seeing him for years, and I have a lot of wisdom, and I have help from Buddhism, meditation, all this stuff. But I am like, I feel like he's one in a million to me. Like having to
Yeah.
start over with a different therapist is difficult. So I recommend Alan. I think he's very like full and tough to get.
I'm sure. Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I don't know. It is hard. I got lucky. I've seen two therapists in my life. And the first one was because I started having panic attacks when I was like in my early 20s, not even
Hmm.
on stage at the time. And I was like losing my mind. I went and got all these tests on my heart, my everything. And I ended up going to a therapist. And I don't know if you've had this experience, but she was like, oh, yeah, you're having panic attacks. And once I heard it was a term that people
Yeah.
have, I was
Yes.
like, oh, okay, I just have a thing that people have.
Yeah.
That was
Yeah.
a huge help to me.
It's so helpful. Just give it a name. I don't care if you make one up.
Exactly. Once it's like, oh, okay, that's a thing.
Yeah, that's
So
Joe List syndrome. You're like, fucking fantastic. Fine, good
yeah, I'll take it. But so
thing. Yeah.
when you were, do you remember having like a lot of anxiety as a kid, or is it just something that came later
No.
after high school, college, everything?
Same with you. I had nothing throughout high school. I mean, there were like rough patches. My parents got divorced when I was in high school. So there was some stuff there, but I was not anxious, didn't know what a panic attack was until much later. Probably even after college, I think. Yeah, I don't think until, yeah, 30s, and maybe some mid 20s. And I didn't, yeah, there was no name for it for a long time. And I didn't really have panic attacks very often, but when I did, I was like, there goes the blurb blurb. And I think I read about it. I do a lot of reading, a lot of anxious Googling, and then kind of figure it out on my own. That's another reason I should just get a therapist, because they'd tell me right away. But in my head, I'm like, oh, look at me finding out on my own. And then I get to feel smart for a second.
Yeah, my therapist had to like really be like, you need to stop Googling. Like I'll be upset if you're Googling, because I'm like, I have like a hypochondria issue too, where I'm like, everything
Yeah.
I feel, I'm like, oh, this must be that. Is that something you deal with at all? Like, are you like an alarmist that's always Googling illnesses, or is it more just psychological stuff?
Yes. And I also have a bias for my own where I'm like, but I think mine is correct. You always think that your own, I'm not like out here like, oh, I have everything. But every now and again, I'm like, that feels weird. I bet that'll be cancer in 10 years. And I'm probably right. Like, why would I be wrong? Do you know what I mean? Like, who is somebody to tell me that I'm being a hypochondriac if in a number of years I end up being correct? Do you know what I mean? Because there is, of course, cancer in a lot of people. So who are we to say that like this pain here isn't that later? Basically, I think I'm a genius. I figured it out.
I feel
Instead of a hypochondriac.
I completely feel that. I completely understand that. And like, I think that's like an old joke. I remember someone was just talking about it. Like, the hypochondriac that's saying they have something for like 50 years and then they're 80 years old and they get diagnosed with cancer and they're like, I
Yeah,
fucking told you guys.
exactly.
Like, I feel that way all the time. Like, I've literally had the same thing. I assess, like, okay, I have this thing because I've
Hmm.
Googled it, narrowed it down, and then I go to a doctor, and that's how strong or powerful my anxiety is. I see a doctor, they say, no, it's definitely not that. And I leave being like, they're an idiot.
I do
But,
the same thing.
and that's what anxiety does, though, because you are like, but there are doctors who misdiagnose.
Right. Oh, I
So
don't trust
maybe
doctors at all. I mean, I do and I don't. I have such a hard time with it. Doctors are so hard for me.
I'm the
I'm
same
just like,
way.
yeah, I'm like, you're 100 and you're like just an old man from Sweden or what. I'm like, there's no way. There's no way. But then yeah, sometimes the confirmation bias comes through. Like I saw a doctor from Planned Parenthood over Zoom, and she correctly diagnosed me and fixed a problem I've had for 5 years. I've seen probably 8 or 9 doctors about whatever this issue was that I'm definitely not going to say. And none of them got it right. One of them got it right, but never gave me anything for it. So I just assumed that it wasn't that.
Right.
And she got it right immediately, and now it's gone. And I'm like, God damn, everybody sucks except for this one 25-year-old woman from Planned Parenthood.
Well, that's the thing. First of all, I mean, I love Planned Parenthood. I got my "We Won't Go Back" sticker right here because I'm a donator. Yeah, I went to Planned Parenthood years ago for my own issue, and they couldn't have been nicer and more discreet. And I was like, I wish every doctor was this person. I loved
They're
her.
so
Actually,
good.
I wrote a dumb short film with the idea of falling in love with a Planned Parenthood doctor, but that's a whole other bag of hammers.
I'm in love with this woman that the whole time I was like, I need to find a way to marry her. Just loved her so much.
I had this premise and I made a little video, but I like the idea of like a guy falling in love with a woman that works at Planned Parenthood, and then I have to go out and keep getting STDs just so I can go see her. And then I'm like, but come on, we have fun together. But anyways, I forget what I was going to say. Oh yeah, but that's the thing with anxiety is there's enough for me with like hypochondria anxiety. I'm like, there are enough people that have heart attacks when they're 38. That does happen. So people are
Right.
like, heart attack, you're healthy, you're 38. But there's a, like, you can find a news story of a 38-year-old guy
Yep.
that runs 5 miles a day and eats nothing but lettuce, and he
Mhm.
died. So you're like, look at this. Maybe I'm that guy, which is
Yeah.
that terminal uniqueness, as we say.
Ooh,
That's a fun
that's
one, right?
nice. That's really fun.
I
So it only,
love
yeah, you just die and that's you winning. That's you, like, do you know what I mean?
completely.
If you're correct, you're like, haha, in your face, I was right about it the whole time, but you're dead. You're dead and
Yeah,
correct.
completely. It's this weird like ego thing where you're like, I just want to be right. So I'm like, I told you guys all, and I've had literally 14 different kinds of cancer.
Yeah.
And I was talking to Ronan about this recently. Ironically, it was when we were recording a podcast, but we hadn't hit record yet. But so I can do it here. But in a weird way, with anxiety, is you thinking, if I worry about this, it won't happen to me. It only happens to people that aren't worried about that, which I try to do a joke about that when people are like, I just never saw this happening to me. I'm like, well, that could never happen to me because I saw everything happening to me.
Yes. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like, I'll never be that guy that's like, I just couldn't imagine this happening to me because I'm like, no,
Oh,
I
for sure.
imagined all of the things happening
Yeah.
to me.
I imagined it with extra flourishes. This is
Yeah, yeah.
what a basic thing to have happen. I've, yeah, imagined it 10 steps.
I had
That's funny.
super cancer. So maybe I'll go back to working on that bit. But
That's great. Yeah.
so when you have like a panic attack, what is it? What flavor do you have? What brand? Is it like throat closing? Is it heart pounding? Is it
On or off stage, or
uh
different?
either one? Yeah, take me through both of them, because there's different sort of kinds of panic attack, I guess, different symptoms that can come.
Yeah. Off stage, I have those so rarely. Haven't had one in a long time, I don't think. And when I do, I can block it pretty quickly with the what color are your shoes? I do the 5 things. The 5 things you can see, 4 things you can hear, 3 things you can smell. I can't remember what they are, and that's part of it for me. I don't want to remember what they are. I want to sit there and be like, 3 things you can smell. Who can smell 3 things at a time, you know? So that gets me out of it. And yeah, off stage, it's what is it? Yeah, it's a real like narrowing. I feel like a horse in blinders. I don't like pass out, but it's a breathing thing. Yeah, the breathing, it's hard to breathe. I have a huge anxiety about dying without being able to breathe. So breathing is a big thing for me. I don't want to drown. I don't want to suffocate, because those are horrifying to me. So it's a lot of that, not being able to breathe, and yeah, the brain just kind of like shuts down and keeps circling. What else does it? Yeah.
And do you like shake?
I don't know. I think I would not be aware of that. I don't know. I don't think I'd be present enough to know if that's. I'll check in next time and I'll let you know.
Yeah, please. Let me know. Text me, send me a video.
Yeah. I would think, yeah, hands probably. I have like a mild tremor every now and again.
Yes.
Yeah. Like too much coffee. It feels like too much coffee that keeps going up.
Yeah, see, that's what I have, because for me, the shaking, the reason that's like, for me, the first like start of it is sort of, I feel shaky, and it feels like that. It feels like I'm on an empty stomach and I've had too much caffeine or too much sugar. And so strangely, that can kind of trigger me to feel like I'm having anxiety, or like cold weather, because I start to like shiver when I have a panic attack, which I haven't had in years. But cold weather will strangely, when I go out, if it's freezing, if I'm shivering, I'm like, oh my God, am I having an anxiety attack, or am I just cold, or both?
Yeah.
And so for me, like a big thing when I was having panic attacks, I would like want to crank the heat up, or like go into a steam room, or like put a blanket on, because I'm like, if I'm warm, it feels like I can't have anxiety if I'm like sweating. I'll try to like sweat it out.
That
But
feels
yeah,
right.
I would like shake violently. Like my hands would start going like hardcore, or my neck. I could feel like my neck pulsating, or like face muscles.
Little twitches. Yeah, I'll get a little twitchy.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a twitchy guy anyways, but I mean, like, that's what would be the worst. And that's what was hard with like having one on stage
Hmm.
is my hands start fucking trembling. And then I feel
Hmm.
like the whole audience is like, look at
Hmm.
this guy, he's freaking
Yeah.
out, which is one of the reasons when you did a late night, you did Colbert. Did you use a microphone? I can't visualize.
Yes. I carried it on from backstage because I was afraid if there was one in a stand, I would fumble it with my scared hands.
Yeah. See, that's why I always go
Yeah.
no microphone
No
because
cord.
I'm
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
afraid of just standing there and being like, I'm like, at least I can hide my hands or have them folded.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, that's my big fear. Not my big fear. I mean, I have a lot of bigger fears, but that's one of my fears with like a late night is like just
Hmm.
your hands trembling, which I
Hmm.
talk about this a lot. People are always like in the comments, like, this person seems nervous. I'm like, they are. They're on fucking TV.
I love comments when they nail it. I'm like, those are all the things I think too. Thanks.
Right.
Is this my brain is online, just like typing in things it already knows?
Oh, that's the worst part of anything online is that
Yeah.
you're like, ah, shit. I mean, some of them you're just like, no, that's ridiculous. Get out of here. But
Right.
some you're
Yeah.
like, oh man, people see that.
Yeah. My greatest fear realized. Yeah.
That's like Mulaney has that joke, I think, about the kid saying, look at this high waisted something.
Yeah.
Something they call him high, and he's like, oh,
He's got feminine hips.
yeah, that's what it is. Um,
Uh-huh.
but yeah, for me, it's just like horrible shaking. And now,
Hmm.
do you get through the set? Like, does anybody know? Because like for me, the audience doesn't even realize. I mean, or you
No,
just what happens with you?
exactly the same. They don't realize it. And then the first few times I was shocked that no one could tell. And now I'm like, oh, it makes sense. I become really dry, I deliver my jokes in not a completely different way, because I do tend to vary pretty widely just based on my mood alone, but I will become very stoic and dry and I stand pretty perfectly still. I just become one of that kind of a delivery style comic
Right.
and just kind of get through it. Um, yeah, no one can tell. I think one time I killed when I was just fully panicking for like 45 minutes. It just never stopped. I was like, okay. But usually it's triggered because I'm only doing okay.
Right.
Or yeah, which is worse than bombing somehow. If it's like a mediocre set, I'm like, and I gotta keep this up for how long? Um, mm, yeah, it's very, very quiet. And yeah, I just kind of shut down and just do the jokes and don't enjoy it at all. And I'm in my head the whole time, like, how do I get out of when it starts, that's the worst because you're like, no, 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 no. And then it just kind of slips into it. Sometimes I'll get through half a set and I'm like, good. And then all of a sudden it's like, and you're panicking. And I'm like, why now? For what? I'm under a tree. Like, why would I don't need it now? Or a joke. Oh, if I'm trying out a new joke that or I have a newer joke that I don't want to say believe in, because it'll be something I believe in, but I'm afraid to put out there in front of people because I'm afraid they'll judge me, or I'm afraid I'll say it wrong and come off as anything, like a bigot or just whatever it is. Yeah, if it's too dark, I'm like, I don't want to make somebody remember their dead child by talking about something, or like a school shooting joke, anything like that early on before I'm like, oh no, I believe in this joke. Or if it just seems like there's a lot of moms in the audience, really anything like that, I'll just get in my head and decide that people aren't enjoying it or that I'm making them sad instead of helping them through something terrible. Then I'll start to slip into the panic mode.
Yeah, completely. I know that feeling. I mean, first of all, a few things, completely agree with like a full bomb is better than a mediocre set.
Hmm.
Partly because it becomes funny. Like in your mind, you're like, oh, this is
Yeah,
like a story. This is going to be hilarious. I can talk about
right.
this,
Exactly.
backstage. This has gone so bad that it's at least eventful. And you're like, there's nothing I can do. Like it's just a full bomb. It becomes very funny and strangely enjoyable.
Uh-huh.
Mediocre, especially if other people on the show are doing well,
Oh yeah.
is just the worst, because you're like, if it's mediocre, that means like there's some laughs, there's some tee-hees. It means they are capable of laughing. They would
Right.
enjoy it if you were just better. So that's
Exactly.
where I think it's like devastating that you're like, oh,
Yeah.
I'm doing like whatever. I'm doing like fine.
Yeah.
Um,
They've ranked everybody and I'm at the bottom. Yeah.
yeah,
Mm-mm.
exactly. And so I totally get that. And I know that feeling too of like you're halfway through a set and all of a sudden it comes in, because it's almost like a doorbell. Like the doorbell rings and you're like, shit, no, don't come in. And
Yeah.
then you're like, maybe if I get down or hide. And then all of a sudden you're just in another war. Then you start thinking about
Mhm.
like, how do I get rid of this person at the door, instead of just continuing to, watch TV, whatever the analogy is, doing
Right.
whatever you were doing inside the house before the doorbell rang. But yeah, once it's in there, that seed, you're like,
Yeah.
shit, now it's going to
Yeah.
happen. And what's so strange with anxiety and panic is it's so counterintuitive. The more you try to stop it or prevent it, the more
Mhm.
it's coming. That's why the key is just sort of accepting, like, all right, let this person into my house. I guess I'm bad with analogies,
Yeah.
but um, there was something else I was gonna say about that. Oh yeah, that feeling too of like the audio doing a joke where the audience like thinks I'm this or something is like allowing them to kind of their feelings become facts. You're like, oh, I'm a bad
Mhm.
person because they took it this
Mhm.
way. I mean, that's
Right.
such a fear also.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I did a joke the other day in Brooklyn. It was 2 nights ago. It was in Brooklyn. And I get in my head about Brooklyn because it's so hip and cool and all this stuff. And I feel like they just hate me. But
I
I'm
think I'm
doing,
the opposite. I'm here too much. So now when I try to leave Brooklyn, so yours is a better problem to have,
yeah, well, I guess
by
with a
the way.
complete reverse. Well, in my mind, I'm like, I'm a straight white guy. They think I'm the devil, the patriarchy, the whole thing. If I say anything, but
Uh-huh.
I did a joke, and maybe I got to change it. But the joke is about I'm trying to quit my. I've read this book called How to Break Up with Your Phone that I love, and I'm trying to.
Sam read that. Yeah.
Oh, it's amazing! I'm trying to get her
Yeah.
on the podcast. Catherine Price wrote it.
Oh wow. That would be awesome.
It's a great book, but I was doing a joke. She recommended this app called Moment, and it tells you how many times you picked up your phone that day and how much time you spent on it.
My phone
And
already does that. Yeah.
yeah,
I
so
hate it.
I'm using it, but the joke is that I'm like, it just tells you that you're a piece of shit. It doesn't help
Yeah.
you. And I was like,
Yeah.
there should be repercussions. And the joke was like, if you pick up your phone 100 times, we send a dick pic to your mother. Thanks. That's funny, right?
That's great.
And then I
That's
was
great.
like, if you pick it up 200 times, we tweet out the N word from your thing. And the crowd was just like silent. It was silence. And I like came apart. I'm like, they hate me. They think I'm a bad guy. I'm like, don't you see why that would be? And this is like 3 minutes into my set. Like I had 12 more minutes, and the whole time I'm like, they think I'm a racist. I hate that. I'm like mad at them, and
Yeah.
I'm not saying the N word. I'm saying I'm picking
Yeah.
a thing. I had to top,
That would be terrible. Yeah. That's
and
so funny. And that's so Brooklyn not to laugh at that. They're too
yeah,
afraid to laugh at that. That's absolutely something that I would save for anywhere but Brooklyn. Yeah.
yeah. I feel like I'm like this. I think would work elsewhere, but
Mhm.
it was that kind of thing. And then I went into like this anxiety, and then I had all these emotions of like anxiety. Does everyone think I'm a bad person? Am I going to get canceled? And then I'm like, are they? And then I'm also in the same time I'm like, fuck these people. They're idiots. They can't even break down a joke.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then I don't know if you have this experience. Then afterwards, everyone, like I was with Sarah and Sean Donnelly. They're like, that was a great set. You killed. I'm like, what? I'm like, they all hated me. They thought I was a piece of shit. So a lot of times you just don't, as my mantra all the time, my thoughts are not reality. I have
Yeah.
to remind myself.
Yep. Yeah. Sam tries to tell me that all the time. And I'm like, no, they're real. Everything I think is happening. It's so hard not to, yeah, think that everything. Because then you have to admit that you're stupid too, to go back to what we were saying earlier, a little bit. Like, if my thoughts aren't reality, if then my thoughts are wrong, then I'm dumb for thinking that.
Right. No, and then that becomes more self, which is also a thought. It's all
Hmm.
thoughts.
Hmm.
Because you think like sometimes you think like this thought is independent of those thoughts. Those thoughts were
Hmm.
crazy, but this is I'm thinking those things because I'm crazy. But
Hmm.
then also thinking you're crazy is also just a thought. You're not
True.
crazy. It's someone
And
I
then
heard.
like, even if you're correct with some of the thoughts, I'm like, sometimes maybe I am nailing it with how people perceive me, but then what? And then if that's true though, what now? Like, it's also like nothing changes. Like, it's kind of like, who cares? I guess you care because you want to be whatever best version of yourself you can be and make adjustments, but at the same time, it doesn't really change much if it's true or if it's not, because you can't confirm it, maybe.
Right. Well, this is where therapy comes in, because you get to that real crux of like, why do you care what people think?
Yeah.
Why do you need everyone to like you or agree with you? Which is, that's what my therapist says every therapy session since, 1998 or
Yeah.
whatever. I haven't been in therapy that long, but yeah, it is that thing is like, you want ultimately. I remember reading a thing one time that said all fear is based on two things: dying or being alone, which my therapist doesn't agree with, but I think that's really interesting. It comes down to one of all fears are one of those two things. What do
Ooh,
you make of that?
I'm gonna think about that. That's, yeah. I feel like I need like an hour to sit with it, and then I'll come back with the whole. That sounds right, just off the top. That sounds correct.
Well,
Being alone and death. Yeah, I think so. I don't know, but then so you say something to make it not true, and I'll agree with that.
I'm the same way. My therapist is like, I don't agree with that, but it is, if nothing else, it's very interesting or thought provoking, because like, obviously, like, if you're afraid of heights, you're afraid of falling off the thing and dying.
Hmm.
If you're afraid of snakes, you're afraid of the snake biting you and then it's poisonous and no one will be there to help you, you die. And if you're afraid of, public speaking, you're afraid that everyone's going to hate you and think you suck. Like, oh, this person's dumb. Fuck that guy. We don't want to talk to that person. Um, so, I mean, I can't go through everybody's every fear, but I would think under this um, sort of proposition that the fear of like bombing or alienating the audience is that maybe either you'll never get booked again, you'll have no money, you won't be able to buy food, and you'll die, or the fact that everyone will
Oh
be
yeah.
like, she sucks, fuck her,
Yeah.
let's not
Yeah.
be near her ever again, and then you'll be alone and
Right.
die. This is just
I
me
could. Yeah.
following
No,
out
you're right.
this thing. I'm not saying this to you.
No, that sounds correct. Yeah.
um, so something to think about as we when we leave here. How is you're in a relationship with a comic, and this is like the thing I'm asked the most. How do you
Hmm.
guys sort of make that work, and how does each of your anxiety come into the relationship? Are you good dealing with other people's anxiety, and is he good dealing with your anxiety?
He's way better at dealing with mine than I am with his.
Ah,
And it's yeah, with his, I'm like, brush it off, get back on the field. I'm just like a man from the past. He's just very supportive and good at yeah, telling me all the things that you just said. Kind of like, it's unfair that he has to be my therapist sometimes. Um, yeah, I think it's pretty easy to be, and it's nice to be in a relationship with somebody who understands all the stuff and just all the tiny dumb details of like, yeah, I'm gonna be back at like 3 a.m. because I'm doing a show and then hanging out and then doing like an open mic at 1 a.m. under a bridge. And they're like, great, good, get out there, good for you. You know? Uh yeah, I find it fine. I mean, yeah, any problems that we have are fairly small and take place outside of the sphere of being stand-up comics. I think they're pretty common things, like living together during a quarantine when you can't be apart for months at a time, that kind of
right.
thing.
Yeah, it's because Sarah and I get asked this all the time, and people are always like, "There's comics that are like, you don't date another comedian. I would never date another comedian." Which, first of all, I think just like picking any group of people to cut them off from the dating field just seems
Hmm.
like a bad idea. But
Hmm.
like you said, like same with like I talked about my therapist, and like you said, it's like comedians have so much in common. You just understand so much about so many things that you can talk in that shorthand, and they all get it and understand it. That
Hmm.
feeling of like I didn't do well, where people are like, it's one show, but like like, oh
Yeah.
yeah, I get
Yeah.
it. I bombed there too. It's horrible.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's so helpful. But do you find, I mean, you touched on this a little bit, like I find I'm so good with other people's anxiety, but so horrible with mine. Like if somebody's like,
Yeah.
I have this problem, I'm like, oh, I know how to handle this.
Yes.
You don't think this, you think that. But when I have it, I'm like, I'm inconsolable. I mean,
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, exactly the same.
and is he an anxious guy? I mean, I know Sam a little
Yes.
bit, but yeah.
Yeah. Maybe less than I am. Yeah, he doesn't have panic attacks on stage. That's for sure. But I don't think he has panic. I don't think he's had more than maybe a couple panic attacks. I'll ask him after. But he is, yeah, very anxious. Yeah, very much cares what other people think to a
Sure.
degree that's crippling a lot of the time. Yeah, and yeah, if anybody else has a problem, I'm like, oh my God, just do these things that I would never do.
Right, right. Yeah, it's so weird because, and it goes back to our thoughts, is that like we just don't trust ourselves. Like I need
Mhm.
somebody that I consider wise to say something because I give myself advice and I'm like, yeah, but you're an idiot. I mean, it's so crazy
Yeah,
how we have that like duality
yeah,
of like, Joe, just say, and I'm quoting something I read from a guy that if he said it, it would help me. But
yeah.
I'm just saying it. So I'm like, no, you're a moron. Um,
Now that I know this, it can't be true. Yeah.
exactly. I mean, that's a perfect way to put it. So I don't know how to deal with that. It's funny you mentioned earlier, like a long time ago now, and we'll wrap up soon. I don't want to take up too much of your time, but you mentioned earlier that like your anxiety has sort of been better during
Mhm.
pandemic, which I've had people call me and been like, oh my God, dude, you've been talking about this for years. You must be losing your mind. I'm like, I'm actually doing okay.
Yeah.
And what is it about it? Why do you think it's been a little bit easier than you thought?
A little bit of it is the confirmation bias where I'm like, see, I told you guys, I told you. I've been obsessed with pandemics and diseases like this for a long time. I think that this was a long time coming. I didn't think it would be this bad or manifest in the way that it has, but I was like, oh, we've had disease like this coming for a long time. But then just separately from that, for art, it's nice to, I've wanted to take a break for 10 years, but I felt like, or for the last few years, I've wanted to take a break, but I felt like I couldn't because I would fall behind. And because without comedy, it's like, who am I? I would have to deal with that. And now that everybody has crutches, I can sit back and relax and not feel like anybody's getting ahead. It's super unhealthy. All of the thoughts are very um, not good and a little bit mean, where I'm like, I don't want anyone to succeed while I'm floundering. So it's nice that we're all floundering together, although some people are doing better than others. It just feels like it's it is like a break. It's a forced break that everyone has to take, which is my dream. And then I had to pivot and figure out a new puzzle, which was doing comedy outside, which then made the art form interesting again because it was a different set of challenges. And it was really hard at first. And now I'm like, oh, I love performing outside. I look forward to it. I get to be out in nature. There's a tree. The laughs aren't as loud, but then you get used to it within about a month or two. It just became normal. I don't know what it sounds like inside
Right.
anymore. So I have no basis of comparison. And I just get to be in my house a lot, which, as maybe like a very mild agoraphobic, is very soothing, if not extremely unhealthy. But I'm inside with my cat all day and I can't work. And it's nice to, I mean, I'm going to run out of money at some point if they don't do another stimulus or if I buy Christmas gifts. But
Right.
it's just, yeah, yeah, I'm like, oh, I can't do the job that I didn't like to do that gave me anxiety because I wasn't making all of my money on comedy. And even that, I don't know, yeah. And I'm not losing money on these long trips where I get up at 4 a.m. to fly out to
Right.
make a net of $100. It happened
Yes.
so many times in Texas or wherever.
Yeah. I I feel all of those things, and so many comics I've talked to feel the same way of that, like that break where we're all because like you said, and it's funny, like before I would take 2 days off and be like, nah, I'm gonna take a couple days off and really, but you have that feeling of like, oh my God, everyone's 2 days better,
Yeah.
and this has sort of allowed us to let go of that, and I feel so similarly as like I've been doing comedy for 20 years now, and then I was on the road like hardcore for 14, and so it's like, oh wow, this is a long time to take a break from the same thing, waking up at 5 a.m. I haven't woken up from an alarm clock in 8 months, which I love.
Yeah.
And,
sleeping. I get all the sleep I need every night.
yeah, it's nice to just wake up when you wake up. So I feel you, and I hope that we, as in you and I and comics and people all over, can take all the good aspects of what we've had and like bring that into our lives moving forward. Like I have to be able to be like, all right, I'm taking 2 weeks off instead of one night off. Because I can't. I had that image that I'm sure you had before, and you kind of alluded to it, but like the idea of taking like 6 months off from comedy is like insanity. And now you kind of know, like, all right, I actually can. I'll be fine. So, I agree. I feel you. Thank you so much for doing this, Carmen. This was really fun. I appreciate it. It was nice to get to know you.
Thank you for having me on. It's a delight to talk about anxiety.
Oh, it's always fun. I love it. Where can people find you? Tell everyone about your stuff.
Oh gosh, I'm on Twitter at Carmen Lagala, on Instagram at Carmstagrams. That's about all I do really these days. You know, they can see me in Brooklyn outside. I think shows aren't happening for the winter. At least it's slowed down. So good luck finding me.
What about a podcast? Here. You must have a podcast.
I don't have a podcast.
What? Oh my God. A comedian with no podcast. That's like
sin. Yeah.
That's unheard of. I mean, you might be the comedian, and I know
Let's start a podcast called I Don't Have a Podcast. It's just silence.
I thought about early on, like a couple of years ago, having a podcast called Everybody Has a Podcast. Here's mine. But I mean, I've had Tuesdays with Stories for a long time, but that's wow, that is impressive. I applaud you.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much, Carmen. It was really fun, and I appreciate you being on. And I'll steer everyone to your social media and your late night set. You did a late show with Stephen Colbert, right?
Yeah, I watched it once, so and it was so hard. Hard. I don't ever want to see it. Yeah.
I watched one of my late nights. I was at the Cellar and they played it at the Tonight Show, and I was like curled up in a ball. It was like the worst situation ever.
That's awful.
And then somebody afterwards was like, "What grade would you give yourself on that?" And I'm like, "You're not supposed to say that. You're supposed to say that was great."
Yeah.
It was brutal, but everyone else should check it out. It won't be painful for everyone else. It'll be enjoyable. So
maybe.
Spoken like a true comic. Carmen, thanks so much. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You got it.
Mindful Metal Jacket is hosted by comedian Joe List. Produced by Joe List. Edited by Matt Kleinschmidt. Executive producers Robert Kelly and Matt Kleinschmidt for the Laugh Button Podcasts.